Okay, hello Bio. We are continuing on with chapter 3, section 3 with different cycles of matter. So now we're going to look at a couple other important nutrients and how they're cycled throughout the environment. So the first one that we're going to start with is nitrogen. So we're going to look at the nitrogen cycle. So all organisms require nitrogen to make protein. So protein, again, big portion that we've been talking a lot with our cells. So nitrogen is a big component in that. So although nitrogen gas is the most abundant form of nitrogen on Earth, only certain types of bacteria can use this form directly. So like 75% of our atmosphere is made of nitrogen. However, there aren't a lot of organisms that can go out there and just grab that nitrogen and use it just how it is. There's only a certain type of bacteria that can do that. And there are these bacteria that will live in soil and on the roots of plants called legumes. So that'd be like our beans and things like that, I believe, are legumes. And they will convert nitrogen gas into ammonia in a process known as nitrogen fixation. So we've talked about this before. So that is a process of changing the nitrogen into a form that can be used by plants, and then therefore the plants can make it usable for other organisms out there. So there are other bacteria in the soil that will then convert that ammonia into what are known as nitrates and nitrites. And then once these products are available, producers can use them to make proteins, and then the consumers then eat the producers, and they'll reuse the nitrogen to make their own proteins. And so the whole first part of that cycle with nitrogen fixation with the ammonia and with the bacteria converting the ammonia into nitrates and nitrites, that actually goes on inside of that inside fish tanks as well. And one reason why fish tanks aren't very successful sometimes is because people just dump too many fish in there at one time. There's too much ammonia, and then it will kill the fish. So here is what our nitrogen cycle looks like kind of out in the wild again. The nitrogen fixation being the main way that it is removed. Actually, the only way it can be removed from the atmosphere is through nitrogen fixation. And then there also, again, it'll be released in a bunch of different ways as well. So the nitrogen cycle is how it would look. And so then when organisms die, our decomposers return nitrogen to the soil as ammonia, and then the ammonia may be taken up again by producers. And then there's other soil bacteria that will convert our nitrates into nitrogen gas in a process called denitrification, which means kind of taking away some nitrogen. And this process releases nitrogen into the atmosphere once again. So it will release the nitrogen from the ground so it can be absorbed back up into the atmosphere once again. And so then there's one more important nutrient, phosphorus. And phosphorus is essential to organisms because it helps them form important molecules like DNA and RNA. So we've talked about those before. And we know that phosphorus is important because it helps us make up our DNA and our RNA. And most phosphorus exists in the form of inorganic phosphate. And this is released into the soil and water as sediments wear down. So as different rocks and things like that are broken down, it will release it into the soil and the water, and eventually it will enter the ocean where it is used by marine organisms, and some will stay on land and cycle between organisms and the soil, and plants will bind the phosphates into organic compounds. So our plants will use up these phosphates as well, and then organic phosphate moves through the food web and through the rest of the ecosystem. So again, it's absorbed up into the trees and then into our plants, and then it is eaten as well. Again, it's just always constantly cycling through our different parts of the environment. So we've mentioned how these nutrients cycle. However, there is a limit to how many nutrients that we can actually have inside of an ecosystem, and we can kind of measure this by looking at what is known as the primary productivity. And the primary productivity of an ecosystem is the rate at which organic matter is created by producers. And one factor that will control the primary productivity of an ecosystem is the amount of available nutrients. So we can't have an unlimited source of nutrients all the time, and so we have to take a look at our amount of nutrients and come up with our primary productivity. And if nutrient is in short supply, it will limit an organism's growth. And when an ecosystem is limited by a single nutrient that is scarce or cycles very slowly, this substance is called a limiting nutrient. So there might be one nutrient that is really necessary for a lot of different animals, and if it's not there, then a lot of different animals could suffer, and then only the strongest would pull out until that nutrient is back and available to them again. And when an aquatic ecosystem receives a large input of a limiting nutrient, such as runoff from heavily fertilized field, the result is often an immediate increase of algae and other producers. So that's saying that all of a sudden this limiting nutrient that there wasn't any of, all of a sudden there's a ton of it, and then a lot of algae will reproduce, and this is known as an algal bloom, and this will disrupt the equilibrium of an ecosystem, so that could mess up the normal balance of the ecosystem. So that is it for chapter 3. Let me know if you have any questions.